In 1969, the National Educational Television Network aired the first episode of what would later become one of the most influential pieces of children's television. Sesame Street is everywhere. From the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, to touring shows, to theme parks, to guest appearances in other theme parks, to Legos, to memes, to merchandise. From the Tiny Desk concerts to the Chicken Shop date and—
Can you shut the fuck up?
Do you pay rent?
No.
I didn't think so.
Who cares? Get to the point.
Okay, God. What I'm trying to say is that, at least here in the West, Sesame Street has reached complete cultural saturation. Everyone knows the show. Even if you've never watched an episode, I would be willing to bet that you can name at least one character.
What if I can't?
Can't you?
I'm a puppet. I don't count.
Yeah, whatever. As of today, in the past 53 years, over 4,600 episodes of Sesame Street have aired. With each episode being around 50 minutes, that's a little over 160 straight days of content. Because of this, I think it's all too easy to forget that before Sesame Street was a massive piece of pop culture, it was a science experiment. A test to see if education and entertainment could be combined to create an effective piece of educational children's television. Today, using TV as an educational tool may seem like a no-brainer, but at the time it was revolutionary. There had been many attempts, and perhaps more importantly, many failures. On top of that, the origins of Sesame Street are deeply political and intrinsically tied to how race and economic class impact a child's educational opportunities. It's my hope to shine a light on Sesame Street's complex history, how it's changed in the modern day, and why, because of Sesame Street, children's television has never been the same. But before we can understand what Sesame Street did differently, we need to understand the media landscape before its debut, all the way back in 1969. Specifically, what the fuck were kids watching, and more importantly, what did successful shows have in common? Before the introduction of educational content, children's television had a distinctly different feel from what we've come to expect in the modern day. While it can be argued that entertainment remains the top priority of many children's television programs, it used to be the only priority. And this was reflected in the type of content produced. Now, the amount of content being produced in the 1960s is not quite as overwhelming as the amount of content being produced now, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just gonna pick a few case studies. The first of which is the 1966 children's television program Batman. As funny as it is to watch Robin run around in his underwear, Batman is not only a huge product of its time, both structurally and stylistically, but it's also still relatively well known in modern day. Part of the reason Sesame Street was so revolutionary was because it was able to create something that was artistically similar to non-educational programming. We can't understand how that happened if we don't understand what that programming looked like. Shows typically had a bright and cheery tone. According to Glenn Weldon, writer for the Wall Street Journal, Batman as a character was often dismissed as yet another ripoff of The Shadow, and didn't find success until the introduction of a character designed to lighten the mood. Robin. No, not that Robin. This Robin. Quote, "All remnants of the dark, deadly Batman of 1939 faded away. It was this Batman, the cheery, duly deputized do-gooder of the daytime, that producers of the 60s Batman series cut and pasted onto the television screen. The show was a sensation. In a nation riddled with political unrest, viewers wanted a place to escape. And when ignorance is bliss, parents trusted their children could consume content without unanticipated exposure to the scary real world. Viewers of the program came to expect a very specific tone. It was fast-paced but lighthearted, comedic but action-packed. Joan Gans Cooney even referenced the show in her report, The Potential Uses of Television and Preschool Education."
And who's that?
She's one of the founders of Sesame Street.
And she wrote a report. Big whoop.
Well, it later became the blueprint for Sesame Street. And I'll be talking about it a lot in this video, because it's very important. Sometimes all it takes is a random report from a random lady to completely change history. And I think that's fascinating.
Huh.
What?
Nothing. Nothing. What did it say about Batman?
Well, I'll tell you. My own limited poll bears this out. It is difficult to find a young television viewer from Harlem to Greeley, Colorado, who does not cite Batman as his favorite television program. Beginning at an early age, we can assume, children are conditioned to expect pow, wham, fast action thrillers from television, and certainly highly visual, slickly and expensively produced material. While the introduction of educational content was a deeply intentional choice, it can be argued that the lack of education prior was also intentional, even if that simply meant a lighthearted tone was prioritized above all else. Weldon also credits Batman's bright colors and distinct visual style for its success. Quote, "The pop art movement, which treasured anything slick, colorful, and mass-produced, like, say, comic books, was cresting, and producers resolved to ride that wave by reproducing the simple 2D world of Batman comics." Of course, Batman wasn't the only show using fast pacing and bright colors to its advantage. Variety shows like The Howdy Doody Show also dominated the television landscape years prior, and similar shows continued to find success through the 60s and 70s. Largely inspired by vaudeville, variety shows showcased many, often unrelated acts. Viewers could expect comedy skits, musical performance, dance numbers, and so much more, all crammed into the tight half-hour to hour-long program. The programs were fast-paced by nature, designed to cater to their audience's notoriously short attention spans. Watching The Howdy Doody Show didn't feel like watching an hour of content. It felt like watching a 5-minute short, and then another, and another, and another, and so on, and so on, and so on. It was like the 1960s equivalent of scrolling through TikTok. Fast-paced, quick, short-form content. And, in a world before CGI, practical effects like, say, puppet were not uncommon.
And now, we're stuck in stupid YouTube videos.
Who's we?
Puppets.
Right. The Howdy Doody Show had a cast of marionette characters, and even adult content like The Jimmy Dean Show and The Ed Sullivan Show, as well as TV advertisements, were far from strangers to the medium. A certain puppeteer we'll be discussing later played a very big role in a lot of that early programming. But we'll get to that. What's important is that despite each show having its own distinct style, story, and target audience, they still fell into a lot of similar tropes. They were comprised of a variety of different mediums and forms of artistic expression like puppets, animation, and music, and children were responding with baffling enthusiasm. While these shows were incredibly important at the time, and yes, they were well put together, entertaining pieces of television, they prioritized the bells and whistles of fast-paced entertainment over the possibility of education. Of course, this isn't a flaw of the program itself, because education was never its priority. Rather, it's important information to use as background before discussing how educational content incorporated these tropes later on. It's also important to note that just because a show's intention wasn't to educate doesn't mean that it didn't. Children learn from everything. Everything they see, hear, touch, smell, taste, every environment they're in, every person they interact with teaches them something. Even seemingly unimportant tidbits could have a lasting impression if a child saw it enough times on the television screen. In Joan Gans Cooney's report,
The founder lady.
Yep.
The same report? The blueprint one?
You know, for someone who says that they don't care, you sure are paying a lot of attention.
Shut up.
Okay. In the report, she writes, quote, "Incidental learning of all kinds from television programs has created some rather amusing gaps in the knowledge of young children. It is not uncommon to find that a child has no idea where apples come from, but can give you a fairly accurate, if rudimentary, account of how to get a rocket into outer space. With NASA at its peak after the funding of the Apollo program in 1961, it makes sense that kids would know that. That program got a huge amount of media coverage." And that is just one of a million different examples. Learning doesn't just happen in the classroom, and while these shows might not have taught children the alphabet, it did teach them what to expect when they turned on the TV. So what changed?
So what changed?
I just said that.
Say it better?
Okay.
Critics charge that schools are failing to provide equal education for the poor. They say schools aren't doing enough. But children of the poor can't wait. While national controversy rages, they are growing up.
It wasn't until the increased public awareness of the successes and failures of the education system due to the civil rights movement, the passing of Brown versus Board of Education, and the Coleman Report that the merging of education and children's television became a priority. During a time of political and social unrest, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, was passed in the United States. As mandated by this act, the U.S. Office of Education published a report that outlined the inequality of educational opportunities for elementary-age students in the United States. This study, known as the Coleman Report, found that despite the ruling of Brown versus Board of Education nearly a decade prior, there was still a distinct difference in educational achievements between black and white children.
The Coleman Report doesn't make light reading. Its official title is ponderous, Equality of Educational Opportunity. It's a 700-page document filled with technical tables, charts, and statistics. The two-year study involved more than 600,000 students and 60,000 teachers in some 4,000 schools. It was conducted by the United States Office of Education under the direction of James Coleman, a Johns Hopkins University professor.
The study reported that 87% of white students in grade 12 scored ahead of the average black 12th grader.
But that isn't new. Obviously, schools with better resources would be better learning environments.
Well, yeah, for once, you're right. The Coleman Report didn't introduce the idea of the achievement gap, but at the time, it was the largest pool of quantitative data presented in its support. It was getting a lot harder to ignore the problem, and simultaneously, huge changes were happening in the world of television.
Like what?
Well, the biggest change is that television was rapidly gaining popularity, especially in the United States. By 1969, it was estimated that American children watched somewhere between 20 and 25 hours of television a week, with low-income families often watching more. The television system itself was becoming less of a luxury, owned by 90% of households who earned less than $5,000 annually, nearly 2/3 of which had 2 sets. 2 facts were true. The public education system was failing to provide quality education to all of its students, and public television had a wider reach than ever before. It seemed only natural to try to combine the impact of television and the necessity of education.
And then came Sesame Street.
Well, not quite.
For what we're going to discuss today is your responsibility. You do have a team relationship with other people, but in this particular area, it depends upon you, on your work, on your motivation, on how you improve in these various areas. In other words, this is your personal, individual concern, things that you must recognize when you are teaching on television.
Contrary to popular belief, educational television shows themselves were not the first attempt at utilizing television and video broadcasting systems in an educational environment. While the best-known experiments happened in predominantly white suburban schools, the Ford Foundation's Fund for the Advancement of Education sponsored a series of programs that integrated television into Manhattan schools, specifically schools where the majority of the student body were low-income children of color. The initial idea was that teachers in school districts with high literacy rates could record lectures and send them to schools all over the country, regardless of economic status. Simultaneously, NBC sponsored the Teacher's Guide to Television, which offered lesson plans and education resources that tied in with the content of network programming. While these attempts were valuable in exploring the logistics of incorporating TVs in the classroom, they were ultimately considered a failure. The glorified lectures failed to engage students, and planning lessons around inconsistently scheduled TV shows that weren't designed to follow a clear curriculum proved difficult to maintain.
Okay, but surely there was something educational on TV?
There was. They fell into a lot of similar traps. The most notable example was Ding Dong School, created by the former head of the education department at Roosevelt College, Francis Horwich. The show was designed with education at its forefront, but operated similarly to a traditional classroom, with a single instructor leading the viewer through various lessons. Despite winning a Peabody Award and multiple Emmys, the video content in Ding Dong School was used to showcase the norms of the pre-existing classroom, rather than an attempt at blending the art form of TV with the science of education. It was slow-paced, lacked a clear story, and didn't try to hide its lessons among memorable characters or entertaining skits. Despite the Chicago Tribune estimating that by 1953, 2.4 million preschoolers and their mothers were watching the daily program, and its 6-year run, 4 of which were international and 2 of which were local to Chicago, the show has been largely forgotten. However, Ding Dong School did have the spirit of a lot of shows that would go on to change the television landscape forever. In a 1966 interview, Horwich commented that, quote, "Too many programs on television rob children of their own ideas, without giving them a chance to create and think for themselves. This belief, the insistence that children deserved better, was at the forefront of many educational entertainment studies." Simultaneously, Play School also started airing in Britain, and while it was much closer to modern-day educational content than Ding Dong School was, it failed to gain traction in the US.
Fucking losers.
No. This isn't to dismiss the importance of either of those shows, just to say they weren't creating a big enough cultural impact to become a norm of the genre. Joan Gans Cooney wrote the following, quote, "Unfortunately, most serious efforts to provide educational fare for young children have been undertaken on a local basis only, and are too often marked by a slow and monotonous pace and lack of professionalism. One wonders if even such a national favorite as Ding Dong School would be popular today. My own feeling is that it would not."
You know my favorite of TV?
What?
Commercials.
Why?
Because I don't have to listen to you talk about them at 3 a.m.
Well, actually...
Seriously?
It's important!
None of this is important!
The more people watch television, the more companies realized that TV advertisements were one of the quickest ways to build brand recognition. Soon, commercials became just as much a staple of the viewing experience as the shows themselves, and it wasn't long before parents began noticing how these advertisements affected their children. In the same report mentioned earlier, Joan Gans Cooney wrote, quote, "Anyone who has small television viewers at home can testify to the fascination that commercials hold for children. Parents report that their children learn to recite all sorts of advertising slogans, read product names on the screen, and more remarkably, elsewhere, and sing commercial jingles. Children's ability to recall what they had seen on screen, often unprompted, supported Cooney's theory that television could be used as an educational tool, and perhaps more importantly, gave her insights on tactics that could be used to hold a child's attention. She went on to write, quote, "If we accept the premise that commercials are effective teachers, it is important to be aware of their characteristics, the most obvious being frequent repetition, clever visual presentation, brevity, and clarity. Probably, then, their success is not due to any magic formula. Instead, television commercials appear to have adopted what has always been effective teaching techniques." The evidence was undeniable, and the results of this theory would be felt for generations to come.
Well, the idea is to teach little preschool kids some stuff that'll be useful to them in school, like numbers and letters and like that.
And your idea is that the kids are going to race in from baseball and turn on the educational TV channel to be taught letters and numbers,
But they will, Kermit, because all the teaching stuff is mixed in with stories and cartoons and us Muppets and real people and like that.
After submitting her paper, The Potential Uses of Television in Preschool Education,
The paper you've been referencing?
the paper I've been referencing, to the Carnegie Corporation of New York, TV producer Joan Gans Cooney teamed up with cognitive psychologist Lloyd Morset to begin developing what would later become Sesame Street. To create the show, they founded the Children's Television Workshop, a nonprofit designed to study how television could be used as an educational and community-building tool. The team was given an 18-month planning period and budget of about $8 million, which is about $69 million today. Coming from the Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the US federal government, the money was used not only for the creation of the show's content, but also to run studies, collect data, test with focus groups, research different story formulas, and so much more. They needed to make sure kids were not only retaining information from the program, but were also engaged. All of the educational research was a waste if children weren't entertained enough to actually watch the show. Cooney believed that to dismiss the idea of educational content due to children's short attention span was to ignore their intellect. Engagement wasn't about fighting children's short attention spans, it was about creating something worth paying attention to. Quote, "Whether or not many hours of viewing television is good for children, we do know that they are capable of long periods of absorption in all kinds of television programs. We know, too, that a young child will remain with a given task or project if it interests him for surprisingly long periods of time. The experience of any parent who has read storybooks to his children would confirm the fact that even very young children can remain interested to a point beyond the parent's endurance."
Kinda how your yapping has passed my endurance.
The goal was to find out what about television was so appealing to children and use that information as if the alphabet was a product to be sold. Sesame Street differed from its predecessors through its ability to blend both worlds, education and television, without prioritizing one over the other. The team behind Sesame Street had people working in education, child psychology, screenwriting, puppeteering, and so many more scientific and creative fields.
They must have some people who know what they're doing at the Children's Television Workshop.
They got an advisory board of the best people in the country, and a research department who are studying kids and testing material and...
Any frogs on this advisory board?
As opposed to using television purely for the convenience that video content provided, Sesame Street used the aesthetics and storytelling techniques unique to television as an artistic medium. Low budget and slow pacing was replaced by the fast-paced humor of shows like Laugh-In, Batman, or The Ed Sullivan Show. While differing slightly from the traditional variety show, Sesame Street's overarching plot lines were often interrupted by short segments, songs, or animation sequences. The formatting of the shorter segments allowed writers to mimic the rhythmic cheerfulness chorus of television advertisements that children could quote line for line and draw inspiration from other shows that had proven successful in the past. Some of these scenes were even repeated frame by frame multiple times within the same episode in order to best utilize the benefits of repetition. Guest cameos from various celebrities were also common in an attempt to draw in audiences from a wide variety of ages. Alongside the fully integrated human cast was a collection of brightly colored puppet characters, a successful attention grabber on the Howdy Doody show, and perhaps more importantly, in successful television advertisements. In fact, it was because of these advertisements that Cooney reached out to one of the titans of the marketing industry, Jim Henson.
Fuck yeah. Sorry. I love Jim Henson.
Well, don't we all? Following the success of his local puppet television show Sam and Friends, Henson made a name for himself through his work on national network programs, such as The Steve Allen Show, The Jack Parr Show, and Today, as well as, mentioned earlier, The Jimmy Dean Show, where he debuted the first character that would later find a home on The Muppet Show, Ralph the Dog. Simultaneously, Henson began working in advertisements, using his puppet characters and unique sense of humor to help create a distinct brand image for various companies. While his commercial work is definitely less popular than his film and TV endeavors, they're still hilarious.
What are you eating? Savory, succulent McGarry sausages. Want a bite? Yeah. Ah, he's a sharp salesman.
Henson is... Henson is responsible. Henson is responsible for a lot of the most popular Sesame Street characters. He also played an intricate part in shaping the show's distinct sense of humor, as well as bringing on members of his pre-established creative team like Frank Oz or Jerry Nelson, both of which would continue to work with Henson for the rest of his life. Sesame Street turned Jim Henson into a household name, and it was through that show that he was given the connections and resources necessary to create his own show 7 years later, The Muppet Show. But that's another video for another time. Because of the hard work of Henson and the rest of the Sesame Street team, each character had a distinct personality, opening the door for vast comedic potential and giving audiences someone to care about and therefore root for when the stakes got high. Instead of forcing pre-written programs to fit into a tight-knit curriculum, Sesame Street welcomed educators into the writer's room, giving them a say in what lessons needed to be prioritized based on their target audience. Educational takeaways were no longer an afterthought. Rather, they became the content, becoming an integral part of the character creation, plot lines, and music. In the show's 4th season, viewers are introduced to the Count, a Dracula-inspired character designed to teach children basic numbers. When Ernie leaves Bert to watch his stack of blocks, Bert must negotiate with the Count to prevent him from ruining the pyramid before Ernie gets back.
Oh, wait, those are my friend Ernie's blocks, and he told me...
The lesson of the skit, learning numbers 1 through 6, isn't a break from the story. It's the main motivator for the scene's antagonist. To be invested in the story is to be invested in counting to 6. The team behind Sesame Street understood that neither television nor education could be the top priority. Success could only happen if these two worlds coexisted, and this idea was reflected through every element of the production process.
Elmo thinks Whoopi's skin is a very pretty brown.
Oh, well, thank you, Elmo. Hey, you know what?
Huh?
I like your fur, too.
Really?
Yeah.
It should be noted that basic education, like counting or the alphabet, is not the only way Sesame Street tackled the achievement gap. Notably, the show also emphasized building self-confidence within its viewers. As proven by the Coleman Report, differences in achievement based on Black and white children were the result of environmental, infrastructural, and systematic factors, not an individual child's capacity to learn. While this conclusion was unsurprising, data also suggested that a child's self-confidence was just as, if not more valuable to their educational success than external factors. Black and white children who went to nearby, similarly funded schools with comparable educational opportunities still fell victim to the achievement gap. The report blamed this on differing levels of self-confidence and the amount of agency children believe they have over the course of their lives. Black children felt a lack of control control over their future that white children simply didn't. And this difference was often one of the only differences between black and white children with drastically different test scores. The report explains it like so. It appears that children from advantaged groups assume that the environment will respond if they are able enough to affect it. Children from disadvantaged groups do not make this assumption, but in many cases assume that nothing they will do can affect the environment. It will give benefits or withhold them, but not as a consequence of their own action. The Coleman report argued that because of this, it's not the job of any individual teacher to fix the achievement gap, but rather the need to change a ton of environmental issues outside of the classroom. Unlike projects that came before it, Sesame Street chose to represent a wide variety of racial and cultural identities within its main cast. While there were, of course, some exceptions, especially on the local level, at the time, the majority of national television featured a predominantly white cast. And the creators of Sesame Street believed that this was partially at fault for the lack of confidence among black viewers. How are they supposed to believe that they have the power to shape their future if their future is never represented in the content they consume? To not lose touch with this aspect of their mission, Sesame Street brought on African-American psychiatrist Chester Pierce to help design what he called Sesame Street's hidden curriculum. While never explicitly stated within the show itself, the curriculum was created to increase the self-worth of black children through the inclusion of positive black images and role models within Sesame Street. Pierce is also partially responsible for the fully integrated cast, designed to challenge the marginalization of African Americans that children constantly saw on television. Sesame Street itself was designed to mimic real blocks in predominantly black neighborhoods in New York, such as Harlem or the Bronx. Despite facing backlash for depicting dirty environments, the show itself never presented the homes or communities of said environments as deficient, nor did it assign any moral superiority to any of the various family structures represented. By using aesthetics reminiscent of urban areas, Sesame Street was able to emphasize the strengths unique to those communities, allowing them to be celebrated on a national level. Each character is capable of both teaching and learning, and the emphasis on community building and mutual aid rang true to the experiences of many inner-city children of color.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. While the aesthetic choices play a key role in making space for underrepresented groups, the show also takes time within its run to remind its viewers of their personhood. In season 43, Grover wanders on screen, bursting with the realization that he and everyone watching is special.
You know what I have realized? I am special!
The segment is given just as much screen time as something that most would consider educational content, allowing children to learn one of the most statistically important lessons. Grover even reiterated the point in a recent TikTok.
Hello there, your adorable furry blue pal Grover, want you to know that you are wonderful and special and important.
In 1972, Sesame Street invited Reverend Jesse Jackson to recite the poem I Am Somebody, which emphasizes the importance of individuality and the beauty of all people, regardless of race, economic status, body type, or appearance.
My face is different. My face is different. My hair is different. My hair is different. But I am. Somebody. I am black. Brown. White. I speak a different language, but I must be respected, protected, never rejected. I am God's child. I am somebody. Give yourself a big hand.
What stands out the most to me about this segment is not only the words he's saying, but the fact that a large group of preschool-age children of all different races and ethnic backgrounds repeat the words back to him. Not only are viewers reminded of their importance, but they're able to see people that look like them and their communities express that importance and believe it. Not only did the show attempt to help children build self-confidence on an individual level, but it also attempted to help them feel more supported as a unit in a much larger community. Quote, education educators and researchers reported that students' attitudes towards racial minorities, as well as races other than their own, improved notably after watching the show. By granting children access to a wide variety of possible futures and providing them with a more stable community on a local level, the possibilities they're able to envision for themselves increases exponentially. This directly impacts the amount of control they feel over their future, which raises self-confidence and lessens the achievement gap.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Would you be mine?
While Sesame Street may be a great success story, it's not the only show that was thriving during that period. In 1968, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood began airing on PBS. While technically airing before Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood wasn't exactly educational content, at least not in the same way that Sesame Street was. While Sesame Street focused on material taught in the American classroom, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood tended to focus more on emotional education. It had a similar approach to Sesame Street, but it also created a standard formula for each episode, which became comforting in its familiarity. Mr. Rogers would always start the show by entering his house, changing into his loungewear, and greeting the viewer. Unlike the ensemble cast of Sesame Street, which positioned the point of view of the show through the eyes of a child, Mr. Rogers was the clear lead of his show, and talked to his audience in the way that a parent may address their child. Despite these differences, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood also fell into many of the patterns that made Sesame Street so successful. It valued entertainment just as much as education, used skits and segments to improve the pacing, and introduced a wide variety of characters. Both shows also covered similar topics, even if those topics were covered in vastly different ways. While Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood wasn't designed specifically for inner-city children of color, like Sesame Street was, it did famously tackle racism in episode 1065, when a white Mr. Rogers invited a black Officer Clemens to cool off with him by dipping his feet in a small plastic pool. This just goes to show that even at the beginning of educational children's television, the most influential shows understood that education is so much more than just numbers and letters. It's about introducing children to the world around them and encouraging empathy, community, friendship, and love. While not a necessity of modern day educational content, I do think it says something that both shows did a notable amount of outreach outside of the content of their episodes. While Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is no longer airing, Sesame Street continues to do so, but we'll be talking about that later. Also, both shows did an episode talking about the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. One of them was somewhat successful. The other one was considered so scary it was banned from national television and considered a piece of lost media for over 40 years until some random unidentified person posted the whole episode on Reddit. I have a whole video on the topic. Feel free to check it out if you're interested.
Isn't self-promotion kind of tacky?
Jesus Christ, I forgot you were there. What?
I just kind of want to hear more.
Oh my God. You think I'm interesting?
Do not.
Do too.
You didn't make Sesame Street?
Open up new worlds. Street. Hey, Ralph? Why don't you call your show Sesame Street?
My entire career as a TV educator nipped in the... What was that?
Sesame Street. You know, like Open Sesame? It kind of gives the idea of a street where neat stuff happens.
Kermit, why, you're a genius! Mwah!
Yuck.
Long story short, Sesame Street was a huge success. Educational material was more accessible than ever, and the blending of education as a science and television as an artistic medium would become a staple of the industry moving forward. Everyone and their mother was watching Sesame Street, and in the past 60 years, the show has actually adapted fairly well with the changing of the times. Which I guess is also not a surprise, because I can make an hour-long video, but you know, not every show can do that. Through the 70s, the cast and crew expanded, with the intention of hiring more women, including Linda Bove, or Linda the Librarian, a deaf actress, writer, theater maker, and yes, actual librarian. She has a master's in library science. It's so freaking cool. As a series regular from 1975 to 2002, Linda was the longest running deaf character, and Bove, the longest working deaf actor on a single series in television history. She introduced millions of children all over the country to American Sign Language and continues to work in the arts today. Despite the federal government pulling funding in the 1980s, the show was successful enough to continue production on its own, especially with additional revenue resources like magazines, and book licensing, and merchandise, and international programming. As the audience's trust in Sesame Street grew, the themes it was able to tackle expanded as well. Two great examples of this were the marriage of Luis and Maria in 1988 and the death of Will Lee, or Mr. Hooper, in 1982.
And Big Bird, we still have our memories of him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, our memories. Right. Why, memories, that's how I drew this picture.
Right.
From memory.
Very good, yeah.
Yeah. And we can remember him and remember him and remember him.
After a drop in ratings in the 1990s, Sesame Street went through some major changes in order to stay relevant. This included switching to a more narrative-focused writing style, as well as the introduction of the wildly popular Sesame Street character, Elmo.
Fuck Elmo.
What? Why?
He knows what he did.
In 2018, it was estimated that 86 million Americans had watched the program as children. As of today, Sesame Street has 222 Emmy Awards and 11 Grammy Awards, beating out literally every other children's television show ever. It also remains one of the longest-running shows in the world. The Children's Television Workshop, now known as Sesame Workshop, continues to operate as a nonprofit, focusing on the fields of media, education, and community outreach. The program itself, both the show and the nonprofit that goes with it, are still relatively self-supporting. The Sesame Workshop website describes themselves as such. Sesame Workshop is a global impact nonprofit organization with a mission to help children everywhere grow smarter, stronger, and kinder. For over 50 years, we have worked at the intersection of education, media, and research, creating joyful experiences that enrich minds and expand hearts. With a mission to help children everywhere grow smarter, stronger, and kinder, we reach families in more than 150 countries with playful early learning so we can empower each generation to build a better world. A scroll through their website will introduce you to all sorts of different initiatives. There are initiatives designed to provide resources for children affected by military conflict, autistic children, and military families, as well as programs surrounding the celebration of identity, emotional well-being, financial empowerment, formal education, the power of play, school readiness, dealing with trauma, and water sanitation and hygiene. There's a lot. They do a lot of stuff. Now, I wouldn't say Sesame Workshop has a perfect track record. After all, they have faced quite a bit of controversy due to their partnership with SeaWorld and Autism Speaks. But of course, community outreach isn't the only thing Sesame Workshop is in charge of. They also handle things like their touring live shows, musicals, theme parks, and museum exhibits, including their exhibit in the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, which I had the honor of going to a few weeks ago, and it was so freaking cool. I think this video sums up my experience there.
In the original pitch document for Sesame Street, one of the producers talked about how kids didn't know where like apples came from, but they did know how like a rocket could be shot into space because they watched so much coverage of like the Apollo project on TV.
And of course, despite popular belief, Sesame Workshop produces all of the episodes of Sesame Street, and companies like HBO are nothing more than distributors. So if you go on Twitter and you see people saying that because HBO chose not to pick up more seasons of Sesame Street, that the show is canceled and done for forever, that is not true.
Thank God.
All it means is that when the next seasons of Sesame Street come out, they likely won't be on Max. As long as Sesame Workshop has enough money to produce their own episodes, any wide variety of companies could pick it up to distribute it. And while it is a little bit scary that distribution is up in the air, this is one of the most beloved children's shows of all time. I highly doubt it will not be able to find a distributor. Of course, as great as all of these things are, they're still relatively separate from the show itself. Luckily, Sesame Street has done a surprisingly good job at staying relevant. Unlike early attempts at educational content that prioritized education above all else, Sesame Street adapted to the norms of the current artistic landscape and therefore cemented itself as a piece of art in said landscape. But how exactly did Sesame Street change? Let's take a look. In the modern day, bright colors and fast pacing has only increased. Children's television seems to be one of the only genres not plagued by the wave of desaturation, hitting films like the live-action Little Mermaid or the majority of the Marvel franchise. If anything, advancements in technology have made recent episodes of Sesame Street even more colorful, though I would argue that that's not necessarily a good thing. The current sets of Sesame Street, as well as the sets of a lot of big-budget film and TV, reminds me of the architectural term McMansion, which, while primarily used to discuss real-world buildings, can also be used to comment on the changing aesthetics of modern-day film and TV. Because after all, what is television if not a product of the world around it? McMansions are the huge, mass-produced suburban homes of the upper middle class, known for their poor architecture and impracticality. A Blood Knife article puts it this way, quote, "No thought is given to the labor needed to clean and maintain these spaces." Now, I wouldn't say any of the buildings in Sesame Street are McMansions, but I would argue that the unrealistically pristine and mess-free environments of the newer seasons are a result of the McMansion's rise in popularity. We're on a city street, but there's no dirt. The characters paint, but the table they do it on is spotless. A character literally lives in a trash can, but there's no litter. This isn't to say the environments that Sesame Street emulates are unnaturally dirty, rather the way they do that emulation is unnaturally clean. In earlier seasons, a character fixes a pothole, clothes can be seen hanging from windows, doors are covered in scratches and scuffs, and the slightly duller colors of the buildings and materials give the show a lived-in, organic feel, a feeling that, at least in the modern day, is largely missing. I would argue that these qualities of the set were essential to making it relatable to its target audience. Seeing people who look like you on TV is amazing, but there's something to be said about seeing environments that look like yours as well. It's clear that Sesame Street, like many TV programs, has adapted to the visual style of the modern day, a switch made even more obvious by the modern camera's ability to better capture color and texture, or perhaps more importantly, the modern camera's ability to avoid imprinting texture on the footage it captures. I mean, just look at the differences in the opening theme. In season 1, the footage was captured in the real world, showcasing children of a variety of ages, expressing different levels of emotion. The focus is on the children, and therefore the viewer. Comparatively, in the most recent iteration of the show's theme, children take a back seat, and the majority of the footage showcases the brightly colored puppet characters. And this crispness isn't just an element of the production design. There's something charming about the earlier seasons, where characters talk over one another, mess up their lines, or ad-lib. They're imperfections, sure, but they're imperfections that make the final product feel distinctly handmade, in a way that it just doesn't anymore. That being said, the spirit, tone, and intention of Sesame Street feels so similar, so true to its original goal, that I can't find it in my heart to be mad at them, or mad at it. Still, I think it's worth talking about, especially since this wave of perfection in place of play is not limited to just Sesame Street. It seems to me that the more impersonal architecture and interior design becomes in the real world, the more boring sets become in film and TV. Fast pacing has also continued to be prioritized, having a notable effect on the visual style of modern-day film and TV. In 2011, the National Library of Medicine published a study breaking down the logistics behind why film and TV feel faster now than in earlier eras. The study looked at 160 films spanning 75 years to analyze the evolution of shot length and movement on screen. The data showed that the average length of shots decreased dramatically from 10 seconds in the 1930s and 1940s to falling below 4 seconds after 2000. Transitions between shots also sped up, with a decrease in fades that resulted in, quote, cuts constituting almost 99% of the transitions between shots in contemporary film. Of course, these numbers were not collected from episodes of Sesame Street, they were collected from films being produced around the same time. So I stupidly decided to conduct my own study. Over the last week, I have manually counted every single shot in the first episode of Sesame Street and the last 2 episodes of season 54 of Sesame Street. At the time I did my study, those were the 2 most recent episodes that had been produced. I was unaware that another season would be released literally a week before I posted this video, but I'm not counting the shots again, so season 54 it is. Since episodes now run about 30 minutes instead of an hour like they did in season 1, doing 2 episodes in season 54 evens out the amount of time I watched watched of both seasons to about an hour each. I also refrained from counting shots during the theme songs or any animated sequences where it was difficult to tell where shots started and ended. Admittedly, this is a relatively small case study, and if I were to repeat it later more seriously, I would catalog shot lengths from a wide variety of episodes from a wide variety of seasons. On top of that, I am just one person, so as minimal as it may be, it is likely that my results were at least somewhat impacted by human error. That being said, watching the entirety of Sesame Street would take me over 100 days, so this is what you get. With the data that I did collect, it became clear that Sesame Street saw a reduction in shot length similar to the film studied by the National Library of Medicine, just not quite as severe. In Season 1, Episode 1, which aired in 1969, the average shot length was about 10 seconds. In Season 54, Episodes 34 and 35, which aired in 2024, the lengths of the average shots were about 5.4 and 5.3 seconds respectively, or just 5 seconds, if you round the decimal. This means that in the past 55 years, the average shot length of Sesame Street has decreased by about 50% or 5 seconds. 1 second less than the differences in the films from the National Library of Medicine study.
Why the fuck would you do that much work?
I don't know. It was a lot though. Editing Aiden here. Hello. Something that I forgot to mention when I recorded is that I also counted the amount of transitions that were quote-unquote specialty transitions, basically anything other than a cut, a cross dissolve, a special animated transition, that kind of thing. What really surprised me is despite there being a huge difference in the National Library of Medicine study, the percentage of quote-unquote specialty transitions between Season 1 and Season 54 of Sesame Street is actually the same. About 10% of the cuts in Sesame Street are some sort of transition other than just a cut. Like 10% for both of them, right down to the decimal without any rounding. It was the same, which I think is pretty interesting and cannot believe that I left out while recording. The increase in shots is partially because the amount of different camera angles used to shoot the same thing also increased. In earlier seasons, a conversation between 3 characters tended to be recorded using only 2 shots. The first was a wide, showing all the characters, and the second was a medium shot or medium close-up of the most important character in the scene. If this was a conversation between 2 humans and a puppet, the close-up would almost always be on the puppet. In contrast, in recent seasons, a conversation between 3 people would be shot using 4 angles, a wide shot and a medium shot of each individual character. There are also possible insert shots if characters are doing a specific activity like coloring or baking. The actual street segments of Season 54, as well as the Elmo's World sections, had a lot of moments of surprising stillness, but these long shots were canceled out by just how fast shots change during musical numbers. Similarly, the montage segments in Season 1 move a lot faster than you would think that they do, but it doesn't really matter when you average it out because the street segments are just that slow. Of course, shot length isn't the only thing that's gotten shorter, so have the episodes themselves. As mentioned before, Sesame Street switched from hour-long to 30-minute episodes in 2014 in order to better compete against other programs. The 50% decrease in runtime might seem like a lot, and it is, but some shows are even quicker. Episodes of the wildly popular animated show Bluey run only 7 minutes. According to Variety, Bluey was the #1 most watched show in the US in 2024, and media research data shows that it racked up 35 billion minutes watched in 2024 alone. With the rise of social media, attention spans aren't just getting shorter, but the market for short-form content has proven itself to be both lucrative and cheaper to produce. Who knows? Maybe Sesame Street will one day be nothing more than a TikTok account. That's a joke. It was a joke.
That's not funny.
Well, that's because I wrote it before TikTok got banned, so. And since I recorded that, it's been unbanned. Making jokes relevant to the times has proven difficult.
My goal is just to inspire girls to achieve whatever dream they have, no matter their background, their zip code, or no matter the color of their skin.
The way the show has handled diversity has also adapted in the modern day. Of course, Sesame Street's expansion to an international audience introduces a whole new world of diversity, but for the purpose of simplicity, I'll be focusing on American and North American programming. While the show's human cast has always been fully integrated, there's recently been a push to introduce more puppet characters characters, designed specifically to represent underrepresented races and ethnic backgrounds. These characters aren't just exciting because of the on-screen representation that they offer, but also because of the role they've played in diversifying the puppeteers behind the program. Granted, while there are a few puppet characters with explicit races or ethnic backgrounds like Gabrielle and Tamir, the mass majority of the puppet characters do not. Nothing is stopping Bert and Ernie, Grover, Cookie Monster, Elmo, the mass majority of the puppets from being played by non-white puppeteers at some point in the future. However, I do still think it's important to celebrate the underrepresented voices that do find their way on the program. So let's talk about them. In the 1980s, Kevin Clash became the first black puppeteer on the program. You probably know him as the original performer behind Elmo, which has sparked a lot of debate online about his accent and how it was influenced by African American Vernacular English, or AAVE, something that continues to be true about Elmo's voice today, despite the fact that he's been played by a white puppeteer, Ryan Dillon, since 2013. In 2014, Korean puppeteer Kathleen Kim attended a puppetry workshop for Sesame Street and officially joined the team as a puppetry assistant in 2015. Prior to that, she worked as a story producer in reality television and received her first on-screen Sesame Street credit in 2016. In 2021, the show not only introduced Kim's most popular character, Ji Young, the first Asian American puppet character on the program, but also hired her as a consulting producer for the episode where the character would debut. The episode was titled See Us Come Together and was designed to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander cultures. It was later adapted into a book called We All Belong. I follow Kim on TikTok, and one of my favorite videos of hers is the one where she talks about playing the talking couch in the SNL sketch with Ariana Grande.
That's a wrap on Ariana Grande, everybody, and the whole crew goes, woo! And so I'm wearing like these black gloves to hide my hands in case you see them when the mouth opens. And so I just shove my hands between the cushions and I go, yay, like that. And next thing you know, two little delicate fairy hands hold my hands in theirs, shake them, and say, thank you. I'm like, and I'm sitting there inside the couch going, oh my gosh, is Ariana Grande shaking my hands?
In 2020, Megan Pfeiffer became the first black woman to puppeteer on Sesame Street with her role of Gabrielle and would become a show regular in 2021. The realization of just how important her position was actually happened by happenstance. While at the Kaufman Studios in Queens, New York for her first in-person recording session, she noticed a wall covered in photos of the entire cast and crew. None of them were black women. Quote, I realized in that moment that I had made history in a show that had already been around for over 50 years. I realized that it would open doors for other black women, women of color, little boys of color, entering the entertainment space to really see that they can be absolutely anything, no matter how niche or unique. Prior to Sesame Street, Pfeiffer competed on America's Got Talent as a ventriloquist and appeared on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, as well as multiple international puppet programs. She also collaborated with the University of Cincinnati to write and perform songs designed to teach children basic financial literacy. Megan won 2 Emmy Awards for Best Composition and Best Children's Short from the series. On her website, she has also listed the fact that she's a mom under her accomplishments, and I just think that's really sweet. It should also be noted that there has been a bit of controversy surrounding puppet characters with explicit races and ethnicities. I've seen a lot of people online argue that by introducing a puppet character who is explicitly black, like say Gabrielle, it implies that characters like Elmo or Big Bird or Bert and Ernie explicitly aren't. Now, I have done a lot of research, and I've yet to find any evidence that distancing themselves from specific races or ethnicities was the intention behind why so many early Sesame Street characters are monsters or animals. However, I have found a lot of information about puppet characters with explicit races and ethnicities as early as the first season in 1969. Most notably is Roosevelt Franklin, who was introduced in 1970. The character was created and voiced by one of the human actors on the show, Matt Robinson, and was heavily influenced by Robinson, a black man's, understanding of black culture. In fact, the reason Roosevelt Franklin faded into obscurity despite being relatively popular is because he was somewhat controversial among black intellectuals. Some of them claimed that he was too black, while others claimed he was not black enough. In 1991, Rosita was introduced, who is not only explicitly stated to be from Mexico, but is also bilingual and speaks Spanish relatively frequently throughout the show. And of course, while characters like Prairie Dawn and Betty Lou aren't explicitly white, If you Google it, it says they are pink, which is unhelpful to me. They both have straight blonde hair, which has led many people to interpret them as such. It seems, at least to me, that one side believes that explicit representation is not worth the loss of interpreted representation, while the other side seems to believe that explicit representation is a net positive, especially if it means more puppeteers of color are getting opportunities to work on the show. I personally don't think I'm the right person to pick a side, but I did think it would be remiss not to mention it. And hopefully I've done a decent job of accurately representing both points of views. Of course, there are so many more incredible artists of color working on the program. Not just puppeteers, but writers, educators, production designers, composers, editors, board members, and so much more. For a show built with representation at its forefront, I think it's important to acknowledge how the diverse team of people that created it are part of the reason why it was so successful, and part of the reason why it continues to be so successful even today. Due to a thorough understanding of how to blend the benefits of television as an artistic medium and education as a science, as well as an emphasis on the importance of building self-confidence and a sense of agency among its viewers, Sesame Street successfully bridged the gap between education and television and revolutionized the way these two worlds can coexist on screen. And with all of that being said, that is my comprehensive history of Sesame Street.
You're done?
That is all I have to say.
You know what? That wasn't terrible.
Was that a compliment?
You did good.
Thanks.
Oh God, don't give me that look.
What look?
This doesn't have to be a big thing.
Okay, sure. Just, let me do the outro. That's all I have left.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay. Jesus Christ. I have been working on this video for a full calendar year. It took me 3 days to film this sitting on my floor with no heat in my apartment building and 3 mouse spottings. Yes, I have a mouse infestation in my apartment right now. I don't want to talk about it. I don't mess around when it comes to the Muppets. Feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to hear if there was any important moments of Sesame Street history that I may have left out, any episodes or characters that really resonate with you as a viewer. I tried my best to keep the video comprehensive and quick, which is crazy to say about a video this long, but I could have said so much more. And with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!